Now, on our first conversation, fresh protests marred by violence and looting in Kenya has attracted series of condemnations and calls for calm by high dignitaries, including the African Union. The protest began on March 20th after a call by opposition leader Raila Odinga for bi-weekly protests blamed President William Ruto of being unable to control the soaring cost of living and therefore called for his resignation. Sending a note of warning, President Ruto has threatened to deal with all those involved in criminal activities during Monday's protests. So far, at least 2 have been confirmed dead. The protest has now entered its second week despite a ban imposed by the Inspector General of Police, Japhet Koome, when protests degenerated into riots. At the same time, the African Union chairperson, Musa Mahamat, has appealed for calm and political dialogue. And now join us for this conversation, we have Sasha Seraphine Mbote, that's the director of Sasha Mbote Foundation. She joins us from Kenya. We also have joining us Tele Nzomo, programs officer, Siasa place in Nairobi, Kenya. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you.
All right, so Sasha, let's look at the protest. I mean, it has entered its second week, but it has been characterized by looting and property destruction. Now, from what we know, it was supposed to be about the inflation and the high cost of living. So how did these protests degenerate to what we are witnessing today?
Basically, what we're witnessing today, the protests, of course, I know they are politically motivated and incited. That is the way it happens in Kenya since many years back. That is, we always find unrest after elections. But I think this time the people are protesting because they are hungry. Right now, if you look at the dollar, it's going to 145. So the people are hungry and the people are jobless, especially the youth. So anytime they are incited and they don't have jobs, and sometimes they are even given money to do these things, they will definitely go on the streets because they need the small money that they are being given. But what I look at it and the way our politics play in Kenya, I just think that there is no need for this because this is what has happened since I was a child. I am 42 years old. I found this and nothing has changed. So I think it's not about us. It's not about change. It's about small people's fathers fighting for big people's fathers to get positions in the government, while them, the small people's fathers don't even have jobs. That is how I see it, and it will never change unless they change their narrative and give the youths the job that they need.
Okay, now, Sasha, you've talked about hunger and the job crisis in Kenya, but we're seeing looting. So how is it that a peaceful protest has turned into looting of properties? I mean, we saw the former president of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta's farm also being destroyed. So are you trying to say, because earlier on you said it was politically motivated, are you saying that the protesters had nothing to do with the destruction that we're seeing?
The protest, actually, it's supposed to be a peaceful protest. But then again, like I'm saying, when people are hungry and you give them an opportunity, they are going to do what they have to do. And that is why they went and vandalized people's businesses. They burnt a mosque in Kibera. They burnt a church in Kibera also. So as long as the people are oppressed economically, these things are going to continue to happen because the youth are jobless. So this is their opportunity. If they see something that they can sell tomorrow to have bread, they are definitely going to do that. And then it's not okay for politicians to always try to incite the youth. But I always say, I no longer blame the politicians because the politicians it's a very small margin compared by the 40 million Kenyans. So it is the people to know their power and to demand reparation for their country and the redemption of their future. Right now in Kenya, we have a lot of debt. Our leaders continue borrowing money. They are funded money from European nations. The money that doesn't even do what it's supposed to do, it goes amongst people's pockets. So these problems are still going to be there because the local person is oppressed with taxes. So they are going to try and demand. We don't have proper hospitals. okay, fine, we are doing better right now with infrastructure. But when the people are hungry and they don't have jobs, these things are bound to happen whether they are protests or not. If there are no protests, definitely you can go to some places and someone will mug you, because the first time if someone is hungry, they will come and knock and ask you for food. The second day they will come and knock, they will increase the knock. The third day they are going to break in the door and they have to get food. So this is exactly what is happening in Kenya right now.
All right. Okay, now Tele, looking at all that is happening, I mean that Sasha is saying that the no hunger, the job crisis has led to this vandalization that we're seeing. So do you feel it was right for the Kenya's Inspector General of Police, Japhet Koome, to announce a ban on the opposition protests, or do you feel it was trampling on their rights to protest?
Well, the Inspector General doesn't actually have the powers to ban these protests. Every person in Kenya has the right to protest, and all that you have to do is notify the police so that they're there and they can ensure there's order. The problem with what the Inspector General did is that the moment he banned it, it started to create an environment where the next day or during the protests, there was inevitably going to be a fight or a standoff between the police and the protesters, because the police now have come there saying that this is illegal. They're there ready to disperse the protesters. They're ready to throw tear gas at them. And of course, the protesters were always going to respond. You saw them responding in Kisumu. We've seen them responding here in Nairobi, in Kibra, and then that creates a very, very nasty situation. So in my opinion, the Inspector General made matters worse by trying to claim that he could ban them, because I don't think he has the power to ban these protests.
So what did you expect the IGP to do when there was already vandalization? Because what William Ruto is saying and what the Inspector General of Police is saying is that the reason why there is a ban is because destruction of property has happened. So what would you have expected from the IGP?
Well, first, if you go back to the first protest, which took place last week on Monday, even before those protests had taken place, you had heard the police saying that we haven't given permission for this to happen, right? Part of the problem is that the police themselves, instead of coming there to preserve order, they are coming there in a way to try and stop these people, to actually try and ensure that these protests don't take place. The police is supposed to be an independent institution, and in fact, one of the things that President Ruto, then he was deputy president, one of the things that he really decried about the last 5 years was the misuse of the police by the regime at the time. And he said that this time around, we're going to make things different. This time around, you're going to see an independent police. But unfortunately, it seems as though the police here is trying to take sides, because we're starting to see the government against the opposition. Instead of the police remaining neutral and saying, look, we're here to preserve law and order, you see them trying to take sides. You saw yesterday, or rather on Monday, when people went to the former president's farm, the police took such a long time. I think they took over 24 hours to come and stop people from vandalizing his farm, from actually setting fire to his farm. Why is that the case? Why are they taking so long to go and stop that scenario? But they're already in Kibra, they're already in Kisumu, claiming that they're there to protect people's property. Clearly, there's a problem.
Okay, now, Sasha, still looking at this issue of the protests going on. Now, Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua has said that the demonstrations cost the country about $15 million. And now, Raila Odinga has said that this protest will continue Monday and Thursday. How much will it affect the livelihoods of Kenyans? Because the reason why they protest is because there's no job, but yet businesses and livelihoods have been affected. So can Kenya actually afford to continue with these protests?
The country right now is not doing well because since 2007 was the last time that we had a very, very bad situation in Kenya after the elections. And we had not really recovered, especially in tourism, when COVID hit the market. So we are, especially us who are in tourism, we wouldn't want this to continue because we haven't even recovered, and then this is happening, and the people, like I'm saying, the people are hungry, the people are angry. I don't think it is their right to fight for their rights. You know, it's their right to fight for their rights, but then they don't have to vandalize things. They don't have to vandalize things. They can, and also, I've been getting people calling me from Tanzania. Are you okay? We are seeing what is going on in Kenya. I'm like, I'm in Mombasa, and there's nothing like that is happening. Like the photos that you were playing, the ones that people are wearing red t-shirts. Back in 2018, I was amongst those people wearing those red t-shirts. That protest happened in 2018. It happened in 2018. I was amongst the people who are at the front line.
So what you're saying, Sasha, right now is that the protest is not as large as we're seeing. Is that what you're saying?
It's not. It was
so in like how many counties do we have this protest? Is it just in one county? Tell us exactly how large or how small this protests have been.
This protest is one of the smallest in the entire history of Kenya. It happened in Nairobi. It happened in Kibra. I know there was a small wrangles in Mathare. Those are slums, like the biggest slums in Kenya. And then there is the Kisumu County where Honorable Raila Odinga comes from. Otherwise, everywhere else, everything is normal. I am in Mombasa. I've been doing everything. I've been going to the city. You wouldn't even say that we're in the same country. So like I'm saying, mainstream media likes to preach bad things about Africa. Those pictures where you're seeing people with red t-shirts, I was amongst those people. Those demonstrations happened in 2018. It happened in 2018, and we were fighting for the youth to be given an opportunity, because we are not given opportunity by our leaders, not only in Kenya, but all over Africa. But when they come for the votes, they come for the youth, because they know that we are very, very strong. And what I'd like to tell my fellow youth, I stopped being an activist, because also I came to realize, especially in Africa and actually in my country, some of the activists that we used to work with, you come and realize that they are being paid by international bodies to talk ill about the government. We saw some of them, they have already joined the opposition. So it's not even about the change in Africa. It's about how am I benefiting? It's about my interests. So the time I saw it's all about that and there's no change, I stepped aside, because there is nothing I'm fighting for. I have not seen any change. My grandfathers left this world without having changed. So it is for the people to know their power, because the people are more powerful than the politicians. You know, they have to demand. They have to demand. The youth don't have jobs. So I don't see why I should come and vandalize your job because a politician has said something. And while I don't have money, I come to your shop and I take things on credit. So our people also need to wake up. You know, they need self-education. They need self-love. These people who vandalize people's businesses, that is not protest. Those are people who hate themselves and they are angry and they just wait for something to trigger them. And that is exactly what is happening in the small portion that there is this chaos in Kenya.
Now, Tele, I also want your take on this, on how large or how small this protests have been. That's the first part. And then the second part, let's look at the election campaign. I mean, William Ruto vowed to improve the lot of ordinary Kenyans. And he talked about the so-called hustlers and being the president for the downtrodden. So how do you think he's been able to handle the economic situation in Kenya? Because we hear of rising costs of removal of subsidies. So first of all, the question is, how big or small are these protests? I don't just want to hear from Sasha, but yourself. I want your own opinion on that. And then how William Ruto has been able to deal with the economic conditions in Kenya.
I think I'll agree to the extent that we've mainly seen these protests in Kisumu and in Nairobi. The other parts of the country we haven't seen cases as bad. But I would add a little bit of caution in saying that just because we're seeing it in Nairobi and Kisumu doesn't mean it can't spread to other areas. One of the challenges we have in this country is that we have very serious underlying issues, right? And I think she had mentioned this before. We have issues of tribalism, we have issues of land, and whenever we have such protests, you know, they can bring back these issues to the fore. And you start seeing problems now starting to spread. You know, in Kibra we started, or in other, let me not say Kibra because we don't have authenticated information, but you're starting to hear of areas where there's tribal clashes here and there are starting to come up. So I am worried that these protests can lead to something big, especially now when you start seeing or when you start hearing of people who are being sponsored by the government to go and actually destroy property. Again, that is not authenticated, but it is possible and it is happening. And unfortunately, it is something that we have seen before. We saw it in 2007, where people were used by government to go and fight the protesters. As far as how the president is handling the current economic status. I don't think he's doing a really, really good job. It's of course a very challenging situation that we have in the country. We have a lot of debt in this country, which is, I think, the biggest problem and his biggest issue. How do we improve this economy? Yet we are paying a lot we're servicing a lot of debt each year. The only thing that he's really had that he can touch on is the Hustler Fund, which is basically an opportunity for people to take a loan of around 500 Kenyan shillings, but he hasn't managed to fulfill his promises. The problem that he had is that he made very, very ambitious promises during the campaigns. One would say promises that he wasn't able to fulfill, saying that he's going to reduce the cost of living in his early days. That was always going to be extremely difficult. He had to remove subsidies because, unfortunately, subsidies have to be paid for something, have to be paid by some money. Where is he going to get that money from? So I wouldn't say he's done well, but again, unfortunately for him, he's the one who decided to make very, very unrealistic promises, and I think he's paying for that right now.
All right, thank you so much, Tele. And still on Ruto dealing with the economy, I mean, right now he's presently in Germany while there have been protests going on. And he also talked about the war in Ukraine while he was in Germany, rather while he's still in Germany. Do you find it strange or weird that he's in Germany while there's so much chaos in the country? Or do you see it as part of his efforts to try and improve foreign investments in Kenya? Sasha?
Oh, okay. Yeah, this is exactly what I'm telling the youth to wake up, because it's not about us, it's about them. The president, the country, people have been incited. They might, like what he just said, they might be incited and ban the country. It has happened before. It is bound to happen again. And what do these leaders do in the end? They handshake, they give one another deals. They have money that they split amongst themselves. While they incited you to fight one another and then you killed one another, they handshake, they give one another positions, and their lives go on. Right now, the people in the ghetto are the ones who are fighting one another. Those politicians, their children are in gated communities. They are protected by surveillance and bodyguards. It is you who is suffering when you go to vandalize your neighbor's property.
Sasha, sorry to cut you there. When you said the politicians now, we have Raila Odinga who has called this protest, while William Ruto is calling for calm. So when you're saying politicians, let's try and see who exactly you're trying to talk about here. Because on one side, one person is calling for protest, and the other side, the other person is not calling for protest.
Yes, this is exactly what I'm saying. It is systemically set in Africa. It's never been about us. The government knows how it works with international bodies, and then the same international bodies know how to fund the opposition to incite the people. So if we continue to be divided as Africans, not only as Kenyans, we are never going to move a step forward. We are never going to move a step forward. It has not been about us all those years. See, Kenya, we received our independence in 1963. It's the same thing that I found that is still happening. Zero change. If someone comes to like the last post-elections in 2007, when I was working in south coast of Mombasa, we almost got killed because we were from Kibaki's tribe. Kibaki died before I ever saw him live. So you'd be very, very ignorant to go and attack someone because of their tribe. We are all Kenyans. Personally, I have said and I say it again, I don't care who is the president, he's from which ethnicity, for as long as he is a Kenyan. So we also need to ask our leaders, Raila and also Ruto, they need to sit down and have dialogues that can work for the common man, because when they come to ask for votes, that's what they promise us. I just spoke, yesterday I spoke about the way Mama Samia said when she was being asked in South Africa, the way she's working well with the opposition. The people in the opposition are still Kenyans. We are supposed to come up together and know how they're going to work up with the government, because yes, it's good to have the opposition, because the opposition helps us to push our agendas, you know. And Kenya, it's not like Kenya has that kind of unrest that they're trying to show on international news. I've had a lot of people call me from Tanzania. I have made a network all over Africa. People are calling me, are you okay? We saw that you're in Kenya. Are you okay? I'm very, very fine. It is the same thing like when I was in South Sudan. They just picked, my mother kept on calling me, you need to come back home. And I was telling her, the war is in Darfur. I am in Juba. Juba and Darfur is like Tanzania and Kenya. It will never even reach to where I am. So we also need to understand that mainstream media is funded by international bodies to show that the bad things about Africa all the time. Sometimes it's not what it looks.
All right, now talking about this dialogue with the opposition, Tele, I mean, this is quite something that we see a lot in Kenya, this coalition, the handshake. And now Raila Odinga, aside the rise in inflation or the high cost of living and removal of subsidies, is also saying that William Ruto's government is illegitimate, even though the Supreme Court has validated his candidacy as the president of Kenya. So do you still see Raila Odinga's move as excesses, or do you feel that William Ruto has failed to form a dialogue with Raila Odinga?
I think this is what I think Sasha was trying to say. The most unfortunate thing about our politics and our protests is that we don't really have people-inspired, people-driven protests. These are always, they seem to be always associated with politicians. And unfortunately, politicians are always out for their selfish interests. Yes, we can talk about the economic situation as is right now. We can even, some may even argue that our electoral system may not be as good as we would wish it is. But what happens when these guys meet? What happens during dialogue? Will dialogue cause the price of goods to come down? Unfortunately not. Dialogue will see the politicians come to the table. You will see them negotiate with their own interests. They will trade. They will make their own trades, their own boardroom trades, and then they shake hands. Now they'll come back and say, okay, it's a peaceful country, but unfortunately, the economic situation will still be the same. The political situation will still be the same. I don't see where dialogue is really going to take us other than simply stopping the current situation. It's not going to solve our problems. Dialogue will solve the politicians' problems. And yes, it's going to bring peace because this is politically inspired protest and politically instigated violence, but it will not solve Kenyans' problems. So I am not too keen on dialogues or handshakes because I don't think they're going to benefit me per se.
And what do you think that William Ruto can do? Because right now he's in Germany, as I once asked Sasha. He's talking about foreign investment, talking so much about how the war in Ukraine has affected the price of wheat, flour, and so many food commodities. So what do you think are some of the steps that William Ruto, if he's really for the people, should do to alleviate the sufferings of the people?
I think, first of all...
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
No, Tele, go on, then I'll go over to Sasha. Just continue.
Okay, sorry. I think that he has to sit down, number one, with his economic advisors, and they need to come up with a plan that will work for the country. And I think they also have to be very honest to the people. One of the biggest challenges we have in this country is that majority of the people do not quite understand the economic challenges that we face. People think that we can solve some of these problems in a day or in a month or in a year. We can't. I think people need to come up with long-term solutions. We have to do our job in as far as educating people and them ensuring, look, these are the challenges that we have. And this is what we can do to solve them. The second thing, and this is the most important thing, I think William Ruto must not think about his re-election. Unfortunately, for you to do what is right, sometimes you have to do what is unpopular. And that means making some very tough decisions when it comes to the economy, right? Making tough decisions, reducing the amount of spending. He might have reducing the amount of spending. We've seen him giving so many positions to politicians who've lost office simply because he sees them as an opportunity to campaign in 2027. He can't be thinking about his re-election. He needs to start thinking about the economy and the people. That's what he really needs to do.
All right, so quickly, Sasha, because we're really far run out of time, but you wanted to give your views on what William Ruto should do.
He needs to give the youth jobs. The jobs they keep on promising them. Where are the mama bogas he promised that he's going to work with? Are they on the high table? Where are the Buddha guys? Buddha is the motorbike guys. Where are they right now? Did he deliver to them what he promised? He didn't. He hasn't delivered. Also, Kenyans should know that the problems that we are facing right now are for the last years. President Uhuru and Ruto are in the same government. Those are the problems that we are facing today because of all the money that was borrowed from China. So we have a very long way to go before our country can be delivered. But my parting shot would be like the youth need to stop also being dependent on politicians. I have been in Ghana, I've been in Tanzania, Uganda. The youth are making money straight from their farms with agro-tourism. In Tanzania, I've lived there for very long. Once the election is done, you won't hear the local Tanzanians concentrating. The politicians will be doing their things, wrangling one another, opposition. Tanzanians are not there. They are busy with their work. You will hear them again when it's the campaign. They finish voting, the president is announced, life goes back to normal. In Kenya, it is from January to December, it is politics, until the country has become so toxic. I usually actually avoid political debates because you don't know what you're going to trigger in someone. And then it's very, very toxic. It can become violent. So the youth need to educate themselves that they are being used. Like the photos I showed you in 2018. Yes. I used to be an activist, and I was
so
really fighting.
In other words, Sasha, what you're saying right now is that the youth should actually shun violence and try as much as possible to work with the economy. Unfortunately, we'll have to draw these conversations here. We'll definitely have our focus in Kenya, and we do hope that these protests do not degenerate into something more, because Tele, you mentioned your fears about this protest spreading to other countries, but we'll definitely keep our eyes focused on all of it. Thank you so much, Sasha and Tele, for joining us on this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.